you remember we talked, if we want to get from here to here, and this is some sort of beacon, and the wind is blowing from here, then what we've got to try and do is to try and fly the plane like this, so that we are offsetting the wind and flying along this straight line from here to here. If we just point the plane to here, as we said before, what will happen is that we'll be blown to the right, and then we'll then go, whoops, oh dear, and we'll point the plane to there, and then we'll be blown to the right a bit more, and then we'll point the plane again to it, and what will happen is we now point the plane here, we get blown a bit more here, and we call this homing. And what will actually happen is that if we home to something, we will always finish up approaching directly into wind. So we'll constantly be making corrections, going further and further away, until eventually our correction is directly into wind. And we call this homing. And we call this tracking. Obviously, homing is bad. Tracking is good. Now, the reason homing is bad is obviously that you're going further. But the other reason why it's bad is if you're tracking along this line, you know where you are. If you're homing to something, you don't actually know at any point in time where you actually are. And supposing that if I just write on here something like if I just put some controlled airspace on this diagram, you can see what's happened is that we think we're going from here to here. We don't realise that in going from there to there, we've gone via controlled airspace. This is why we try to do everything by tracking to something. It doesn't matter what radio aid you're using, really. Whether or not we're using VORs, NDB, ADF, GPS, or BDF that we talked about before with where somebody's telling us. I mean, this is what we're always trying to achieve, is tracking to the radio aid that we use. So before we start talking about radio aids and things, let's talk about the most simplest one, which is radar. How does a radar work? Well, we all know radar was invented during the Second World War, and it's what made Great Britain, because we managed to shoot down all those German bombers. And the Germans didn't know why on earth the British were so good at it. They produced all that shit about carrots, and their secret weapon was beta carotene and eating lots of carrots, and that gave them night vision. But it was actually radar. So how does radar work? Well, very simply, what happens is you send pulse of radio energy out into space, and if there's an aeroplane, we send a pulse out here, and the aeroplane will reflect a very small amount of that radio energy back that we can then pick up. And the time it takes to get from here to here, because we know that it's traveling at the speed of light, we can work out how far away that plane is. I mean, the typical radar, this will take something like about, say, 20 microseconds. All the way from there and all the way back. And what we tend to do is that tells us how far away the plane is, but we make this dish rotate and we send out a pulse and see what comes back, and then we move it a very, very tiny bit round, only by like half a degree or whatever, and then we send out another pulse and see what's there. And then we move it another half a degree, we send out another pulse and see what's there. And because we don't see that the dish is moving in tiny increments, all it's driven is by a motor that's just rotating at a constant speed, and it's doing about a couple of revolutions, maybe one every 2 seconds, or something like that. But of course, that to the radar head that's moving around here, I mean, this is very slow. In fact, it's going, although to us it looks like it's going. Because in reality, it's going. And it displays this on a planned position indicator. And basically, that this motor here is synchronized to here, and as this rotates, this is rotating in synchronization with this dish. And what it does is it shows us little splodges. There might have a bit of land over here. And these splodges are probably aircraft, and you could probably imagine that you could quite easily see by looking here, you can tell their bearing, and you could also have a look at the range rings. Typically, there's a bit of electronics that will put range rings on it. And these would probably be maybe 2 miles apart, 5 miles, so 5. So we know that this plane here is 15 miles away, and it's like 050 degrees, 15 miles. And this is how very basic radar works. And over the years, obviously, this is no longer a cathode ray tube. This has been replaced by modern digital systems. And the modern digital systems still work the same way, but they can superimpose a map and various other bits of information. They might even be able to put, for example, not just a map, but they might be able to put like where the controlled airspace actually is, for example. And they might, so they know which planes are in what controlled airspace and things like this. So as the technology moves on through the years, they can put more and more on this plan position indicator display. What are the issues with this type of radar? Well, there's a few. First off, when it rains, that also causes returns on the raindrops. So what tends to happen is when it rains, you get kind of a big splodge of like sort of crap like this on your radar screen, and of course your aircraft is lost in the rain. Sometimes at sea, you'll get the waves. It will pick up waves and things, and we call these things clutter. So there's a few issues with a basic radar.
So this is primary radar you're talking about here.
Primary radar. This is how primary radar works. Right. So you're not going to be able to do much with primary radar apart from tell that there's something out there. You don't know who or what is out there. You just have a splodge. So technology moved on to produce secondary surveillance radar, SSR. And SSR works by an active system. So it sends out what's called an interrogating pulse, a very quick pulse of energy. And in the aircraft, if an aircraft receives this what's interrogating pulse, there's a unit on the aircraft called a transponder, and it, as soon as it gets this pulse, it sends a pulse back. Now, the great thing about this system is that the aircraft is transmitting back to the base station. So the base station doesn't have to listen out for microscopically tiny little returns from a piece of metal that's reflecting radio waves. All it needs to do is to receive relatively a very strong radio wave that's actually transmitted by the aircraft. The SSR head rotates with the normal primary radar head. It's just a tiny little thing though, that sits on the top of it, listening to these pulses coming back. And typically on the PPI, air traffic control will have the primary radar and the SSR will be superimposed on the same display. Now, the great thing about this system is it's digital. So the transponder doesn't just send back a pulse that says, "Hi, I'm a plane." It actually sends back a pulse which is 4 by 3-bit numbers. So in other words, it's sending back 12 bits of information. So what's actually happening is that it's actually sending back a digital signal, twelve bits of information, and this 12 bits is a number, and this number you can change in the cockpit. So you've got a device in the cockpit, your radar transponder, where you can actually have 4 knobs, and each knob can go 0 to 7, which is 12 bits of information. So you can actually select what number you want to send back to air traffic control, and that uniquely identifies your plane. So a typical thing would be that air traffic control would ask you to squawk, say 4, 3, 2, 1, and you would select 4, 3, 2, and 1, and your plane, every time it receives this interrogated pulse, would transmit back 4, 3, 2, 1. And we call this mode alpha. Then a few years later, after they developed mode alpha, they said, well, yeah, we can see all these planes, which is great, but we need to know how high they are, as well as where they are. So they then extended this system to include a mode Charlie. And what the mode Charlie does is that the transponder transmits back who it is, and then on the next pulse, it then transmits how high it is. It transmits back its flight level as 12 bits of information. So on mode Charlie, it transmits its flight level, and obviously that's relative to 1013. So for mode Charlie to work, somewhere we need an encoding altimeter. In other words, in our aircraft, we've got to have some means of measuring the input from the PTOT static port and converting that to a digital representation of our flight level relative to 1013. And then that goes into the transponder box, and the transponder selects whether it's transmitting this or this as well. So let's look at the design of a typical transponder. So the main thing to realise is, of course, that air traffic control knows where you are because it's still got that rotating head. In other words, it's going round, it's going, bing, anybody out there, bing, anybody out there, bing, anybody out there, bing, anybody out there, because it's doing this extremely quickly, relatively. And of course, it's highly directional. So that because it's highly directional, it actually knows when it gets the pulse back who you are and where you are on the arc, and obviously by how long it took for you to respond, it knows how far away you are. So now we know who you are, how far away you are, where you are, and how high you are. So on air traffic controllers' screen, on their radar screen, you would actually see on their radar screen something that would look like a little mark, but next to it, it would have something, it would have like normally a little arrow like this, and it says 4, 3, 2, 1, and it will have your altitude, which would be your flight level, which would be, say, 35. And that's a typical display that air traffic would actually have. And that's what it would look like. And if there was a fast jet over here, it might have it would look like that. And this normally this tail is the last 5 times it interrogated that plane. So in other words, you know, separated by so many seconds. So for example, you can look at this little, they can look at this little tail, and they can look at the distance between the dots. That tells them how fast you're going, and that tells them what heading you're on. And of course, you can probably guess that the modern air traffic control systems don't just do this, but they've got extra things in the computer that make sure that 2 planes don't crash, and they go beep 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 beep, and all sorts of things on their display. So what sort of things do we see in our cockpit? Well, this is the transponder that we would normally see in the cockpit. And you'll notice that what we've got is and we just get this a bit closer to the camera, because it's a bit glossy, isn't it? So you can see that the transponder has got 4 knobs, and we can put a number on each of them. And it's also got another knob. And what this other knob is, what the knob is in the cockpit, it's not the guy behind me, the yoke. It's actually sitting in the connected to this instrument. It's got a knob that says off. Then it says standby. And it says on, and it says out. So these are typically what a transponder would have. In other words, you can put this knob to standby, on or out. So what this is saying is that if you put it on standby, the electronics in it are working, but it's not transmitting. If we put it on to on, this is mode alpha. In other words, it's just going to send back these four numbers here. And if we put it onto out, it's then mode alpha and mode Charlie. In other words, it's responding back with the flight level. So how do we use this in flight? Well, obviously, when you're on the ground, as part of your startup checks, you click this to standby. When air traffic control tells you to squawk 4321, you would put 4321 and turn it on to out. If you're in flight and you talk to someone like Larnaca and they say Golf India Yankee squawk 66314. So what you would do is you've got this on out, so you would go click to standby. In other words, you stop it working. But you don't want to be, what you don't want to do is transmit a false reading as you're moving the numbers. So you click this to standby, then you'd go 63, whatever it was, 21, and put up the squawk, and you'd go click back to alt. And we call this a squawk. A squawk code. So the air traffic control would say squawk 6321. And then you would just reply back 6321. That's how you use the transponder. And the transponder's got a little light in it that's every time it's interrogated, this light is flashing on and off, so that you know that it's actually working and it's receiving signals and it's transmitting signals back. The only other thing is you've got normally you've got an extra button on here that says ident. And what this button does, if you press ident, it puts your little splodge on the air traffic control just goes, and it just sort of like changes color to, I think it's a yellow color, and just sort of goes ding, ding for a few seconds. And so sometimes if air traffic control are hunting the sky and they can't find you, they'll say, Golf India Yankee squawk ident. So if they tell you to squawk ident, all you do is you hold your finger on this ident button for a couple of seconds, release it, on their screen it will go, and they'll go, that's where that guy is. And what the shit is he doing over there? No wonder I can't find him. Right, through Ned. And the point to realise is that this is happening on every single air traffic controls system in range. So if you press ident, well, that also appears on Beirut, Haifa, Tel Aviv, Paphos, Larnaca, Akrotiri, the couple of airports in the north, probably Dalaman. In other words, it will appear on all of those computer screens, all of those radar screens will go. So you generally find that I mean, all the years I've been flying, I've never been told to squawk ident, and I've never known anybody who makes it squawk ident. Now, one of the things you probably already twigged is that this system with these numbers are going to be for every single radar air traffic control system within the range of that plane. And that range could be quite vast, couldn't it? So you start off by thinking, oh, well, 12 bits. Yeah, we got loads of numbers here, lots of combinations. But really, when you think about it, I mean, Akrotiri can only use maybe 20 different numbers. And they probably had an arrangement with Beirut and an arrangement with Tel Aviv, and they probably got an arrangement with the North. You probably in turn have an arrangement with all of the airports in Turkey. And Pathos has will have an arrangement with all the airports in Greece and all the Greek islands, because you've got to somehow make all these numbers pretty unique, haven't you? And you don't really, if you can, you don't really want to be replicating these numbers on aircraft. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you do. It's just that obviously air traffic control will have, you know, two planes with the same number. So that means that you can run out of numbers with this system quite easily. So the next step up from SSR is when they developed something called Mode S. And Mode S is kind of the same thing, but the difference is that instead of transmitting 12 bits of information, it transmits 24 bits of information. So, in other words, it's millions. And because it's millions, each plane can be allocated its own unique code. So what happens is you have a system where when the plane, or when this is installed in the aircraft, they can set a unique 24-bit code up so that air traffic control doesn't have to say to you, squawk 7516. They know who you are because they can download this master database, and this master database with this unique number has already told them that that's 5 Bravo Dash Charlie India Yankee. It's a Cessna 172. It's operated out of Akrotiri, and it belongs to the Akrotiri Flying Club. And there's other extra information here in this database, like it will say it's a training aircraft, for example. And there's a few bits of extra information here, which I'm not going to go into, but you know, in other words, they immediately know who you are and your home base and all this sort of gear if you've got Mode S. And there's various sorts. Mode S is divided into 2 systems. An elementary system, another one. I'm not going to go into all of that. You can read it in the book if you want. But that's really as far as the exam stops on all this information. So that's SSR. So I think I've got a nice slide showing the picture of the radar head. Here we go, yes. So you can see the radar head for SSR has two bits. It has a big head, which is the primary radar, and it has a tiny little smaller head that sits above the radar head. A radar range, I'll talk about radar range separately. So here we go, here's a typical transponder, as we've talked about. Right, so now one of the things you might be asked in the exam is the range of certain things. Now the Earth, as we know, is round, and how far anything can go in a straight line is just purely a function of how high they are. So if you imagine that we have the surface of the Earth, we have a transmitter, not really to scale because the transmitter would be colliding with satellites and all sorts of things. It's really that big. So the range of this transmitter is basically as a straight line it's here. Now there's a formula that you'll need to now, and basically the range of anything on the Earth's surface as a straight line is 1.22 times the square root of h, where this is in nautical miles and this is the height in feet. So I'm going to write that formula over here, okay, because this is one of those things that you need to transcribe at the beginning of the exam. So you've got 1.22 square root h. So you've just got to commit that to memory, I'm afraid. So in other words, if this is, say, a radar head, and the radar head is, let's say, for example, the radar is on the top of a cliff, and it's 1,000 foot above sea level, and it's pointing out to sea, then the range is going to be equal to 1.22 square root of 1,000, which is, what's square root of 1,000? You got your calculator on you, Robbie?
31.7? No, 31.6.
31. So
0.6.
Yeah, so 31.6 times 1.22 is, what's that?
Sorry, yeah, coming up with it. Here, times 1.22, 38.6.
Yeah, so 39 nautical miles. Now, if of course, if I was to extend this here, and the plane was here, well, of course, now the plane is in range, isn't it? Because we've got two. We've got the height of the radar head and the height of the plane. So if the plane was, say, at, let's say the plane was at 5,000 feet, I've now got 39 nautical miles to here, yeah, to this point. And then I've got 1.22 square root of 5,000. What's that?
$71.
71. So in other words, that
Sorry, times 1.22
Yeah.
should be 86 total nautical miles.
86. In other words, we've got a range of 125 nautical miles, yeah? Because this is 86 nautical miles. In other words, for planes at 5,000 feet with a radar head 1,000 foot above ground, we've got a range of 125 nautical miles. And there are some, there is a couple of questions in the exam database that talk about this. So this is how to work it out. So this isn't just radar. This is anything that's operating radio signals in a straight line. So VHF travels in a straight line. UHF travels in a straight line. Radar, which is operating in a higher frequency band, is traveling in a straight line. These are all straight lines. And the same's true is if you stood on the top of this cliff with a pair of binoculars, you could see this plane 125 nautical miles away. If you got a shit hot giant pair of binoculars, you could technically, that would be your visual range. So anything in a straight line is this form. Now we will be talking about other radio signals later on where they don't travel in straight lines, which hopefully you're an expert on, Ross, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I know that. I know that the propagation is
So Ross,
usually never straight.
so Ross will be talking about ionospheric ducting and all that sort of gear, which is all another bit of the navigation, which we'll be mentioning a bit later on. So that's how to find the range of radar. Now there are some magic squawk codes, some special ones, and these are 7,500, 7,600, and 7,700. And the way to remember which is which is there's 77 is going to heaven. 76 is in a fix. And 75 is taken alive. So these are your three rhyming. 75 taken alive, 76 in a fix, 77 is going to heaven. In other words, 75 taken alive is hijack. 7,600 means radio failure. and 77 is Mayday. So these are the three special squawk codes. And in fact, that's why when we're changing squawk codes, we go click standby before we start twiddling the knobs, just in case we accidentally twiddled the knob through the through one of these sensitive 75, 76, 77. That's really all I need to talk about radar. So next thing I need to talk about is ADF and NDB. In other words, automatic direction finding, non-directional beacons. So this was the first radio aid that we could use from the cockpit that would give us information in the cockpit as to where things were. So radar, in order to use radar, we have to rely on air traffic control to tell us where we are. So we could still navigate using radar. We could, for example, say to Larnaca, Golf India Yankee, request radar vectors. Golf India Yankee radar service. Golf India Yankee, turn right, heading 180. 180 Golf India Yankee. Golf India Yankee, descend 3,000. Descend 3,500. 3,500 Golf India Yankee. Golf India Yankee, squawk 4321. 4321 Golf India Yankee. Golf India Yankee, turn right, heading 190. 190 Golf India Yankee. And so what's happening now is that air traffic control is giving you all the information that you need to actually take you to, for example, Larnaca. And this would continue all the way through. And and sometimes in bad weather, or if you got yourself lost, this is always a good, simple way. And eventually they'd say, Golf India Yankee, you're downwind, or report runway in sight. You're 3 miles to run, report runway in sight. Golf India Yankee, be advised, runway in sight, resuming normal navigation, something like that. Yep. So they would help you and give you radar about it. So NDB was the very first system where they you could navigate yourself without somebody else telling you. And of course, we talked about VDF. We have the 4 big aerials on the top of the air traffic control tower. And once again, that's another form where air traffic control has to tell you where you are. So along comes NDB. So what an NDB is, it's a radio mast. And this is transmitting in the long wave, medium wave bands. And it can also be operating in the higher sort of medium wave, almost the short wave bands. But typically, you're looking at a sort of 100 to 300 range for NDBs, and they're just transmitting a radio signal in all directions. So in other words, they're no different to BPS. You know, they're just transmitting a radio signal from the top of a mast. And
Paul, is that 100 to 300 nautical miles?
sorry, oh no,
Is that
so
nautical miles?
that's the frequency they're operating in megahertz.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Megahertz. Okay.
Now, how their range is huge. Now, because their range is huge because at this frequency, radio signals do not travel in straight lines. They follow the Earth. In other words, they hug the Earth and they bend towards the Earth's surface through gravity. And sometimes, I mean, they can have a range of 5 to 10 nautical miles. But there are ones in the Pacific that, I mean, have a range of 2,000 to 3,000 nautical miles. I mean, there are a couple in the Pacific that have a range of 2,000 nautical miles, and they're transmitted. The signals are transmitted at like 2 and 3 kilowatts, you know, of radio energy, you know, in the medium wave band. I mean, they really blast it out so that you can have incredible range. So what do these things look like on the ground, and what do they actually transmit? Well, let's just bring up a map, shall we? And I'll show you what they actually look like. Here we go. So here's our map of the UK. And let's just find one. Where are we? Portsmouth. Oh, we don't want to go near Port. We don't want to go near Southampton. Horrible, horrible, nasty air traffic controllers. Let's find somewhere a bit more friendly that would actually kind of talk to us. That's got an NDB. Here we go. So here's an NDB. You see, it's just situated just outside of Reading. It's the Woodley NDB. So can you see? I'm going to try and make it through till 8. I might not. I might not manage it. Right. So you can see that we've got a circle, a dot with a circle around it, and a series of dots showing that it's emanating in all directions. So next to it, you'll see you've got a number, which is Woodley. Well, it's got WOD, Whiskey Oscar Delta, and it's got its frequency it's transmitting on, 352. Now the signal that's transmitted from them is Morse code. So when it's transmitting Whiskey Oscar Delta, it transmits WOD. In other words, it's transmitting doot, 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 and doot, doot, doot for O, then it transmits D, which is doot, doot, doot. And it just keeps repeating that, yep, Whiskey Oscar Delta. And all of these radio navigation aids, they are transmitting the Morse code. So that means that we have to, in the cockpit, make sure that we can hear what's actually being transmitted, to make sure that we're actually talking to the right, or listening to the right spot. So how do we do that in the cockpit? Okay. Well, let's explain first off, let's sidetrack a little bit, and we're going to talk about one of the boxes. So in the cockpit, you've probably seen you've got a box with it's got lots of little buttons on it, hasn't it? Like this, yeah. Sitting at the top of the instrument stack, yeah. And these buttons have got, they say nav 1, nav 2, they say DME, they say MKR, and the one right over here says ADF. There's lots of buttons, isn't there? And then this button here says, this last one says auto. This top row says speaker, and this bottom row says phone. And then on here, there's a knob. And this knob says, typically it will say COM1, COM2. So how does this unit work? Well, this is just a simple mixing console. So you've got two outputs on it, speaker, which is the speaker above you, and phone, which is your headphones. And whatever button you press on it is what comes out on either speaker or the phone or your headset. So if you press, say, nav 1, push that button in, your headset is listening on nav 1. If you press nav 2 in, your headphones are now listening on nav 1 and nav 2. And so if you just wanted to listen to nav 2, you then click off nav 1. You've always got another button here on the right which says auto. Typically you always have auto pressed in, because what that does, that always listens on what you're transmitting on. So this is what's listening, and this is what you're transmitting. So if you've got auto selected and you've got this on COM1, it means that your headphones are then listening on COM1 or COM2 as you move this. That would also then move your headphones onto that. So you can have your headphones and your speakers on different things. So what we could do is we could, for example, press this button here that says ADF, and that would then make our headphones listen to the ADF output as well as the radio. So I'd go press that one. That one will already be pressed in. And now I'm listening to the ADF. So what sort of things does the ADF have? Well, let's just draw up exactly what's in these Cessnas that we're flying. I'll draw them.
Oh, when you push those buttons to listen in or on the speaker, when you push those buttons, does a notification go off to, like, say you want to listen to ADF and just listen? Does a notification go off saying that you're now tuned in to the tower or somebody, or no?
No, not at all. This is just a mixing console. No different to it's no different to a like a disco or a PA mixer. It's just it's got buttons instead of sliders or rotary knobs. So all that's happening is whatever you press in is what you're listening to. So I mean, you could be a knob, for example, and you could press them all in, and you'd be listening to everything all at the same time, and you wouldn't actually be able to make anything out. So what you do is you would, when we want to ident the ADF, what we would do is we would just press in ADF, and we'll be listening now to the ADF. And if auto is pressed in, we'll be listening to then whatever that's connected to there. You know, you can select more than one at a time. You can listen to more things at a time, and you can select something different on the speaker above you than you do on your headphones. I mean, it's quite a clever little box, and this box is the same on all aircraft. So on your ADF receiver in the plane, you've got basically a series of knobs here, typically 3 knobs, and you've got a number here that you can select. Let's say, for example, 352, which is we've already said that's Woodley, and we could also select something else, which let me just go and get it. Here we go. There's an NDB at Larnaca, which is 432. And what happens is that as this knob, we've got 3 knobs here. We've got 2 knobs, a big one and then a smaller one on the inners scale. And then we can also pull out the knob, and then we can select this number. So you can put these 3 numbers in on this one knob. You can just go and what that will do, that will always adjust this number here on the right hand side. Then there's there's another button that is on here, which has got an arrow like that. And what that does, that moves the frequency from the standby frequency to the frequency you're listening to. So this is standby, and this is what's called active. So you can just go, in other words, standby is always your next one that you're going to use. And then you just go, and that moves it to the active, and that gives you the frequency here. Then it swaps them around, if you like. So what we could do is I could go, I could put, if I wanted to listen into Larnaca, for example, what I would do is I would just put 432, and it would go on to standby. I'd go, and this would go bink, and then what would happen is the 432 would go here, and the 352 would then go over there. So now Larnaca 432 is the active frequency I'm using. So now I'd look up here, I'd click in ADF here, click in that button there, and now I'm listening to Larnaca, which is the Larnaca So Larnaca NDB is what frequency is it? It's 432. So what I would do now is I press in the ADF, and I'm now going to listen in for the Larnaca ident. So that would be L. So L is which you can remember an L because it looks like a lorry. Imagine, like, look at the wheels on a lorry. That's how I always remember it. You've got a single wheel at the front, then a lorry, then 2 wheels at the back. That's how I remember L. And then it's and then it's C. Well, C is Charlie, Charlie. So that means C is doo, 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 Charlie, Charlie. And then A Well, A is the first letter and it goes doot, doot. So that's when you've been flying for a bit, you'll come up with your own way of memorizing Morse code. So it's always a useful thing to have anyway, to memorize Morse code. So you'll find that most pilots know the Morse code off by heart. So now we've listened and we know that we've got LCA, and then all we need to do now is turn that off, and we now know that this ADF receiver is now receiving the signals from the NDB. We've checked the ident to make sure that we are receiving the right signals from we've got the right one and it's working. Sometimes it might transmit TST, which is test, which is which is a very prominent thing to hear in Morse code, TST. So basically, if something's ever transmitting test and you get the exam question, you cannot use it. It's not that you can use it for VFR. It's not that you can use it if you've established that it's working. You cannot use it. If something's transmitting TST, that's it. You cannot use it. It is buggered. Now, the stupid thing about all of this is that when they are buggered and they're not working, they will transmit doot, 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 doot. Larnaca NDB, unoperational, do not use. Doot, 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 doot. Larnaca NDB, unoperational, do not use. And they'll actually transmit that in voice as well and repeat it. Costas has fucked up and bucketed the NDB. He reversed his JCB into it and dug up the wire. And we're currently looking for it. And that's why you can't use it. It's Cyprus. These things happen. So, what sort of display do we get in the cockpit? And what do the other buttons do? Right, well, we've got another button here. I don't remember what these are now. We've got another button that's got ANT written on it. Now, the way an NDB works in a plane is we have two aerials. We have what's called a sense aerial, and then we have which is a big aerial, a big long aerial that receives everything. And then we have two smaller aerials that's working out where the NDB is. Now, if you select ANT, what it does is it turns off the directional aerials and it just works on the main aerial. The reason why we do that is that sometimes when you want to listen to the NDB itself, and you want to get this ident, is that the other aerials can interfere and you get like strange effects and things. So that sometimes if you can't receive the signal clearly and it's very distorted, you would just go and you press the ANT button, and that just makes everything a lot clearer. Now the other button you've got is a button called BFO, which stands for beat frequency oscillator. Now, what a beat frequency oscillator is in a receiver, particularly when you're dealing in Morse code, is that sometimes radio stations don't transmit, or they don't, when they're transmitting the Morse code, they're amplitude modulated and they don't change the frequency, they just alter the amplitude. And what a beat frequency oscillator is, it just puts a signal in the receiving mechanism, it just puts a dong. And what happens is that as the you receive the signal for Larnaca, for example, you would receive instead of, it would go dong, in other words, there's a background noise, and now you can hear it easily over and above the background. That's what a BFO is. It's a beat frequency oscillator. What other buttons do we have? Right, there's another button here that's normally over here that says TST. Right, so I'll talk about that one in a second. So what do we have in the cockpit then? Well, in the cockpit we have a circular display like this. And the circular display just has a simple needle on it. And what that simple needle does, it just points to the NDB. So in the cockpit, you've got a circular display and it just has a needle. And what this needle does, it just points to where the NDB is transmitting from. So this is your cockpit display. So you've got three things that you've got to sort out in your cockpit to use the ADO. You've got obviously the actual receiver itself. You've got to ident it. Once you've selected the right frequency, you ident it by checking here. And then your actual display then just points, this needle points to where the transmitting mast actually is. So you can imagine if you wanted to fly to Larnaca, what you could do is you could then, in this situation here, you see it's 30 degrees off to your right, so I could roll the wings there, wait until the needle comes straight up, and I could roll the wings level, and now I know that the Larnaca NDB is straight ahead of me. In other words, if this needle goes here, then I know that if I've got 432 set, and I've heard it, and I've got LCA as the ident, then I know that I'm heading straight towards the Larnaca NDB. So this last button, test, what test does is it tests the connection between here and here. And what it typically does, sometimes they do it slightly differently for different systems and different displays, but normally it would just make the needle read 090. But normally when you press test, the needle just goes bing 090. And as you release test, it then goes back to whatever it is doing. In other words, that's just testing your electronics just to make sure that this is connected to this properly and it is actually working. So how do you use it in flight? Well, we come back to our missile trying to hit the plane, in that if we want to go from here to the Larnaca NGB. And we've got a wind blowing here. Well, we've got exactly the same scenario we've already discussed in that if we just keep the needle sticking straight up, yep, and we just point the plane with the needle sticking up, you can probably see what's going to happen. We're going to point the plane there, we're going to drift off to here, we're going to go, whoops, oh shit, we turn left a little bit, we fly up a bit more, and we're going to be blown over here. So the needle, as we're flying, was always going to keep, always start off with it straight up, then it moves to the left. So we're going to, and then it'll point over here. Then we go up. So now I turn left a little bit until the needle points straight up again. And what will happen is that very quickly the needle will point left again, because all that's happening is I'm being blown. So it's the same old problem, isn't it, that we've talked about. So what happens is we get to here, we go, oops, oh shit, hang on, I need to turn. So we turn then and point to there. Then we get to here, we go, no, piss, it's now over there. And then we go up here, then we go, oh shit, it's over there now. So now we turn left again. And before we know it, that we arrive at Larnaca here, into wind. So that's homing to it. We don't want to do that, do we? We want to fly directly to it. So how would you do that in reality? Well, what you do is you point your needle straight up, and let's say, for example, this is pointing your needle straight up. This is giving you a heading of, let's look at this exact example here. So the needle straight up is going to be 0. You now got 0, 1, 0 degrees. Yep. So your DI is now showing 0, 1, 0. And as we already said, that the needle is going to start to go left. So that means that you've got to turn left. But what you do is you don't turn left until the needle's straight up anymore, because we know that that would be pretty stupid, because the thing that's made it go left is because there's obviously a wind from the left. So what I do is, instead of actually just turning left, I turn left, and I turn left even more. So what I do is I change my heading to 350. So I'm going to change my heading to 350. Yep. And the needle's going to point straight up. But the thing is, though, that this NDB is 0, 1, 0, but I'm heading 350. And if I've got this correct, this needle will stay straight up. Because what's happening is that I'm flying like this. So I'm heading 350, but I'm tracking 0, 1, 0. Now, I think what we'll do is we'll just look at that on the PowerPoint. I don't really want to get too much more into this tracking and all that sort of gear. You can read about it in your book if you want, but I've got to be a bit careful here. Is that this is a PPL, and you know, it's not an instrument rating. It's just a PPL to pass the NAV exam, and I'm just giving you a reasonable background information as to how the an NDB works. So let's just some nice little diagrams in PowerPoint on this. Right, so I'm looking for, here we go. So we talked about this, flying to an NDB, we're just pointing the needle straight up, and that should take us to the NDB. If we're flying from an NDB, well, you can imagine if we fly from an NDB, no matter where we fly from, as we go over the NDB and we fly away from it, the needle was always going to point down. So as it's saying here is that if I'm heading north, the needle points down. If I'm heading south, the needle points down. If I'm heading west, the needle points down. So in other words, if I'm flying from an NDB, that's not really an awful lot of use, because all the needle is telling us is we're flying away from the NDB. Well, kind of, we figured that. So so what we can do, if we're flying from an NDB, we can actually use the DI and the needle. And what we can do is we can actually to do some clever tricks to make sure that we're maintaining a certain heading and keeping that needle consistent in one spot. Personally, I don't know why this is in the PPL syllabus, because it's like way beyond what you're probably going to be doing as a PPL pilot. Now, what are the issues with NDBs and ADFs? Right, well, quite a few actually. And one of the problems is that they're detecting radio signals and they're pointing the needle to radio signals. But thunderstorms, thunder and lightning give off radio signals. And of course, the NDB display points to the middle of the thunderstorm. So if you're flying on instruments and you're flying the ADF and you're going to Larnaca and you've got the Larnaca NDB tuned in, and that's where it's taking you, and there's a thunderstorm happening, oh ho, look out guys, the NDB is actually not going to take you to Larnaca, it's going to take you to the thunderstorm. So that's a like crap load of good that is. The other thing is they suffer from a night effect. Now, what the night effect is, it's a radio effect with certain shortwave and medium wave signals, certainly the higher frequency medium wave as we're getting nearer the shortwave things at night. The signals don't just hug the earth, they actually bounce off the ionosphere. And then they can actually travel all the way around the earth. And you can actually get radio reception from literally the other side of the earth sometimes. And these signals that's bounced off the ionosphere can create interference. And also they're not very accurate because they've come so far and they've bounced off all sorts of bits of the atmosphere. They've been bent and redirected and all sorts of things. And they're not really a very good source of direction anymore. And obviously you've probably got an NDB that's being ducted from like South America, when in fact you're trying to pick up the NDB from say Athens, and you're being interfered with one from South America, and it's causing you all sorts of strange things to happen to your needle, and it's wavering and it's not doing very it's not really being very accurate. The other things they suffer from is mountain effects. Now, what a mountain effect is that radio signals, depending what frequency they are, they actually can bounce off a mountain. So if the you do tend to find this happens on the south coast of the UK quite a lot with the chalk cliffs and things, is that the you tune in certain European NDBs, and you'll find that 1 minute it's pointing to sort of like Antwerp, the next minute the needle's pointing to Dover, and you think, hey, whoa, what shit's going on here, guys? You know, I ain't that bad a pilot. And what's happening is that the signal from Antwerp is actually being reflected off the cliffs, and the needle has decided that that's a better signal for it to point to. So obviously reflections are a pain in the arse with NDBs. And you also get what's called coastal refraction. Now, medium wave signals, we've already said, follow the curvature of the Earth. They're affected by gravity. But the gravity created by water and the gravity created by land is not quite the same. So you do tend to find that radio signals bend as they cross the coast. So what happens is that if you're tuned into an NDB and it's a fairly acute angle between the land and the sea, you do tend to find the radio signals are bent, and this is called refraction. And what's happening is that they cause it to give you a false bearing. So, yeah, NDBs have a few issues, don't they?